Okay, thanks for giving me a little pause there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the prequels. And there are a few things that I want to talk about in that. And you have something that you wrote down about the ring theory, which I had never heard of before. But it looks interesting. So why don't you get into the prequel, start us off there, and then introduce me to this the ring theory.
Okay, great. So so the prequels. I think you get a lot of people nowadays who will criticize the prequels and say they're no good, they're bad, unwatchable. To quote somebody who maybe you know that I will not name.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
But anyways, I think that was a common sentiment, especially in the mid 2000s after they came out. Everyone turns around and says, "Hey, wait a second, what just happened? Like that wasn't good."
Do you think there was a little bit of a kind of I'm trying to think of a less charged term than mob mentality, but like that's what everybody thinks, so you kind of go along with it. But
yeah, for sure.
Snowball effect.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like episode 1 had record-breaking numbers. Episode 2 did still very well, and episode 3 ticked back up, lost the ground that episode 2 lost. So a lot of people watched the movies, all 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And today, if you ask most people, they'll say the weakest of the films is Attack of the Clones. So if it was really that bad, if it was really that bad, though, you'd think episode 3 wouldn't have done well because everyone's turned off of it. Why they come around to see the exciting conclusion? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that means it wasn't the worst of the saga. I have my own opinions about that, but
I was gonna say, because I'm thinking now, like, which one do I think is the strongest one? I don't know. I liked episode 2, but maybe of the 3, maybe it's not quite the.
It's the easiest punching bag, I'll say. I mean, episode 1 has a lot to criticize, with Jar Jar being so prominent, for example, and you have Jake Lloyd, who's acting. He's a child actor,
Right.
He had his moments, and people criticize those 2 things a lot. But the good thing about episode 1 that most people agree on is that it is, it's a fun, typical kind of Star Wars adventure. Mm-hmm. It is filmed mostly with miniatures and live action. It has a lot of special effects, but not as many as.
Wait, what are miniatures?
Miniatures is so it's a practical effect. In special effects, you have practical and computer digital effects. So a practical effect meaning they built miniature models of everything and took a camera and shot it there instead of building it in a computer and having a digital camera go through your digital.
This is in Phantom Menace. They use miniatures.
Phantom Menace, they use a lot of miniatures.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
You can go look up pictures of the miniatures.
Oh, cool.
Huge set pieces, like the whole pod racing scene with the stands filled with spectators. That's a miniature.
Oh, interesting.
No,
and I remember like
miniatures.
Well, and it seems like the main palace on Naboo looks exactly like the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of internal shots that were shot in places like Istanbul and Spain, and palaces and that where they could get those kind of interior shots, and then exteriors were mostly miniatures.
Okay.
That were modeled after some of those buildings.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a lot of practical effects. So it's not as off-putting if you go back and watch it now as if you watch Attack of the Clones. I'll admit, even as an apologist, a defender of Attack of the Clones, there is a lot of digital effects. It is almost entirely filmed on a soundstage with blue and green screens. There's some shot in the desert. They went out to Tunisia, as they did for other times that they've been on in Tatooine.
I have noticed, it does seem like that galaxy has a major desertification problem. Like, so many desert planets.
Yeah, no, it's easy to film in the desert. Yeah, and make it look like it's an alien territory. I saw a video of Mars today, and it looked like Arizona.
Yeah.
So anyway. But so there's a lot of digital effects, and it can be off-putting because those digital effects don't always hold up as well as the practical effects filmed at the same time. So if you have a miniature, it will probably still look as good 20 years later because miniature technology is already at its peak.
Yeah.
It's not really progressing, whereas digital effects are always improving.
That's
So
kind
if
of
you
an
have,
interesting point. Yeah, because I mean the miniature seems like that's more old school, but yeah, but yeah, I go and watch some of those older digital effects and think, wow, looks really dated.
yeah, but it's it was avant-garde at the time. It was on
Sure.
the cutting edge
Oh yeah.
technology, the leading edge of special effects. George Lucas always was pushing technology. He was, when he made
Hmm.
Star Wars in 1977, he talks about how the only special effects that existed were people who had worked on things like Jason and the Argonauts or the Pillsbury Doughboy,
Mm,
making like claymation basically.
right. Yeah.
That's your extent of special effects. And so he had to build his own special effects shop, which became Industrial Light and Magic, that now does the effects for probably 30% of the films in the film industry
Oh
come
really?
out of ILM. Just about any major blockbuster you've seen probably has ILM involved
Hmm.
in some way. They, and they've developed all the technology with the first trilogy. Jurassic Park was a landmark in the development of digital technology, and then the prequel trilogy pushed it all even further. And anything that we
Did
have
ILM
today,
do Jurassic Park?
they did, yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So,
that was a major
so you
achievement.
can all tie it back to George Lucas
Hmm.
starting ILM in the mid '70s,
Yeah.
all the way to today. And Attack of the Clones was the first major film shot exclusively on digital. So there was no Kodak film in those cameras. It was
Oh, okay.
digitally shot,
Yeah.
which is a blessing and a curse, because now the resolution can't exceed what the
Oh,
capability was at that time.
right.
Whereas film, you can always increase your resolution by
Right.
rescanning it. But it made it a lot easier for them to edit and create that film.
Hmm.
Um, and now almost all films are filmed digitally. So because it was
Right.
the first, it has the advantage of pushing the technology beyond what any other film could have done at that time. But it has the disadvantage of being caught up with very quickly thereafter. So now the boundary has been surpassed. Um,
Yeah. Well,
but
I mean, I guess that's
I yeah.
that's still being experimental and going out
Hmm.
there and trying something
And I
new.
admire
You know.
I admire George Lucas for taking that risk and doing
Yeah.
something that couldn't have been done. Like
Yeah.
it literally could not have been done, and he still went out and demanded that it be done
Hmm.
and got his team to do it. And so yeah, this film in some ways suffers because of that, but seeing it with your 2002 eyes, uh, it's still very incredibly impressive
Yes.
work. And I think the film works very well. And so kind of come around in a circle talking about this episode 2, why some people believe it's the low point of the series. And I'd say it comes back to that over reliance on special effects. It comes back to some cheesy dialogue
The
and
sand thing.
the sand stuff, and sitting in the leather on the couches with the flames going,
Yeah.
and some poor performances.
Okay.
Natalie Portman is a incredible actress. She's won
Yeah.
Oscars. She's
Yeah.
great, but she has some wooden moments in that film.
Yeah.
Hayden Christensen also is a really fine actor. Maybe not Oscar worthy, perhaps, but he his performance is affected by bad dialogue that
Hmm.
was fed to him, as well as bad captures of his performance.
Okay.
There should have been another take. In other words, there should have
Hmm.
been better dialogue put in and a better take taken out. And I don't think
Yeah.
it would have ended up the way it did. And so those are all valid criticisms. Um, but again, it's every person needs to decide for themselves whether the bad things outweigh all the good things, because every film
Yeah.
has flaws in it. Just depends on if you can have a satisfying viewing experience ignoring those flaws or overlooking them.
Hmm.
And I think it succeeds on that front for me and for a lot of people. Today, if you ask Star Wars fans, most of them would say they do like Attack of the Clones. They do like the prequels. It's had a bit of a resurgence and a renaissance. Primarily, I'd say it's because the people who grew up in that time, who that was their first movie they saw, are now the ones who are most vocal in the community, the fan community. They
Okay.
love that film. They grew up with it. It's
Mhm.
their Star Wars. It's their Return of the Jedi. It's their
Yeah.
the Phantom Menace, or whatever age you happen to be introduced to Star Wars at, that's the film for them. And so, they loved it, and they loved the chase through Coruscant. They loved the love story. They loved the battle between the Jedi and the Geonosians, and the
I liked that
gladiator
scene a lot. I remember I really enjoyed
battle.
that one.
The asteroid field. There's a lot of fun things.
And seeing Yoda in action.
Exactly. That was a huge moment at the time.
Yeah.
Everybody went crazy for that
Mm-hmm.
in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly. As I said, I was never in the theater for that one. But
oh, that's right. That's right.
I've been told that people went crazy for it. And
yeah,
being in Russia at the time, I was told that was a really cool thing. I remember that was one of the first things I heard about, is that Yoda gets in a lightsaber fight. And
I'll have to go back and watch this, because I do remember. It didn't seem goofy to me or anything.
Yeah, it's great.
It seemed pretty cool. I mean, and it seems like that'd be hard to pull off, to have a little tiny little creature fighting, an adult person, but and he's going around and doing flips and stuff, but it didn't seem goofy at the time.
Oh yeah.
But
I think it still holds up.
Yeah, I'm not saying it does. I haven't watched it in a few years, so I don't know. But from my memory, it seemed.
No, it still holds up. If you think about it too hard, it is kind of ridiculous. But I mean, that's the same. Anytime Yoda appears on film, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, and there's a little bit of humor in it too. Like, it doesn't seem like there's intentional humor, like when he's fighting, but then like when he's after he's done fighting, and then he picks up his cane.
Yeah.
There seemed to be
intentional.
Right. Yeah, that was intentional. It's like, okay, look, the guy's just owning this other guy in a fight, and he's picking up a cane like he can't walk.
Yeah, exactly. And they were very aware of how this was going to be perceived. If you watch the making of the Attack of the Clones, they knew that it was right on the edge of being bizarrely ridiculous and being believably acceptable.
Right.
And they were very careful about that. And maybe they succeeded, maybe they failed. For me, they succeeded.
For me, they did. Yeah.
Yeah. So, stepping back for a second. So I think the Phantom Menace is kind of mixed, but mostly mixed positive. It's just mostly people don't like Jar Jar. And then the Revenge of the Sith is mostly praised, I would say. Most people like Revenge of the Sith.
I'll just mention, there's this, I guess, artistic critic, Camille Paglia, who's like quite a spitfire. But she wrote a book called Glittering Images, where she talks about like great achievements in art throughout history. Going back to prehistoric times, and then up to modern times. And one of her chapters is on Revenge of the Sith. It's on George Lucas also, but specifically Revenge of the Sith. She saw as like just a consummate use of storytelling and cinematic technology. And she talks about, praises George Lucas and his use of technology for his craft.
That's one of my favorite movies of all time, and certainly one of my favorite Star Wars movies is Revenge of the Sith. They're mixed reactions, but overall, here's why I think that ultimately they are good and worthy of being held up. And one of them is the ability to analyze them. So this goes back to the ring theory that you were talking about.
Okay.
Listen, like, we can be talking about a film that came out in 2002. You can have a whole podcast about it.
Right.
And there are hundreds of podcasts and YouTube channels devoted to Star Wars. And a lot of them spend a lot of their time talking about the prequels. It's still relevant to this day. It still has a huge fan base. And you can pick out any detail and you can talk about it for an hour.
Yeah. There's like a density of possible discussion there. That's very interesting.
That doesn't make it good or bad, but I think it makes it compelling, which gives it the opportunity to prove its goodness.
I think of the Bible, for instance. So like the Bible has, in proportion to the actual text, there's like got to be thousands and thousands times more commentary and discussion on the Bible than there is Bible in it, right? So there's a lot of density of potential discussion there, and it seems like Star Wars is a similar type of thing, also.
Yeah, and it shows that people enjoy it too, that they're willing to keep discussing it.
Yeah,
and people who hate it are still talking about how much they hate it all these years later. You don't do that if it's Rocky 6 or
right. If it's just some throwaway movie that no one cares.
Terminator Genesis or whatever, you just don't hear about it ever again if people don't like it.
Right.
Whereas with the prequels, they're going to come up again and again and again. I guarantee it will be around 100 years from now.
Did you say Terminator Genesis?
Yeah.
Is that the one with Christian Bale?
It is, yeah. I never saw it, but it was panned.
Oh, okay.
If you ask a Terminator fan, they'll probably say it should never have been made.
Yeah, but, I did see it, and I remember enjoying it well enough, but I haven't watched it since. So I guess.
Yeah.
But
so the ring theory in particular, I linked it for you, so you can read about it. There's a whole website devoted to this Star Wars ring theory. Ring theory is a broader theory that doesn't have to do necessarily with Star Wars, but it's kind of like chiasmus. So I know you're familiar with chiasmus, I'm sure, but the Hebrew poetry. But I think this is more of a Japanese or Eastern concept where things kind of wrap around. That's the ring. It starts where it ends. And in Star Wars, this guy who developed the Star Wars ring theory talks about how each episode is a mirror of the one in the 6-episode arc. Each one is a mirror of the one that is in its place on a mirror image in the sequence, as well as sequential 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
There are parallels, and he goes into intense amount of detail, talking about the way shots are composited. So not sure how much you know about filmmaking, but when you look
not a ton
at a just like photography, you have the rule of thirds where you don't want to have all of the blank space in the same spot. But you don't also necessarily want it evenly distributed.
Okay.
You want it to be in just the right proportion so that it's interesting to look at.
Okay.
And George Lucas is very good at shot composition and setup, cinematography. It's all very, very deliberate. George Lucas, if he's good at anything, he's good at building shots. He's a director, and he's good at working with other people to get what his vision is on film. So if you don't like Star Wars, it isn't because they failed to execute his vision. It's because you don't like his vision, basically.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'd encourage you to read that. You can Google it, the Star Wars ring theory, and just walk through so much detail, shot by shot, story point by story point, how it is a satisfying whole made up of 6 parts.
Okay.
And it works primarily because George Lucas was so intimately involved in making all 6 films.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I've heard that George Lucas wrote the books for Star Wars, but I've never been able to find them. So
the novelizations are written by George Lucas of episode 4, 5, and 6.
Okay. And did he write those before the movies, or was that after?
I want to say that the novelization of A New Hope came out before the movie did, but I'm not positive.
Okay. Well, I won't hold you to it.
But the other 2, I think, were written later, possibly after release.
Well, yeah, I mean, and they normally come out, like novelizations for movies usually come out after, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know for a fact,
unless it was an adaptation. But
The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi in their current form did not exist until their scripts were written. So it would have been impossible to have a novelization until scripts were written. So I'm sure it came.
I guess
after
that makes
the
sense.
script.
Yeah.
But, George Lucas will often say that he knew what the story was going to be, but it's clear if you look at the record, he didn't. He made a lot of it up as he went along. Luke and Leia kissing.
Yes.
5, and then becoming brother and sister in episode 6. That was not planned.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask, because it seems like they're setting up a romance there. Well, and they kiss in the first one too.
That's right. Yeah, the little swing in the.
Right. Yeah. It seems like they're totally setting it up. So let's see. I'm seeing. There's a mass market paperback from May 12th, 1977,
That
on
would be
sale
just
for
before
$50.
that would be just before it was released theatrically. So
Oh, really? Okay.
I think it was May 25th, if I had to guess, somewhere in there.
Wow. Okay. Well, there's got to be a Kindle version or something. I don't necessarily want to spend $50 on the original. Yeah. I'm sure it's been reprinted. Anyway, okay.
So one thing, yeah. So going back to George Lucas as a filmmaker, he is really good at cinematography and directing. He doesn't do his own cinematography, but he has his vision. Yeah. He does often do editing. He's a really great editor. He actually edited together the TIE Fighter attack sequence from A New Hope using 1940s fighter plane stock footage. And then he told the effects guys at ILM, this is what I want you to do. And they matched it shot for shot to that. So he's a good editor. He's a great editor, but he did not do his own editing on Star Wars. He hired people to do his editing.
Okay.
And there's a myth, I'd call it a myth, misconception that that Star Wars in the original edit was bad and it was saved by other editors coming in later and fixing it.
Yeah, I've seen a video on that.
And that is true, except that in both cases, the editors were hired by George Lucas. So he hired the first editor who put it together and it was unsatisfactory. And so he hired another set of editors, and that included actually his wife, Marcia Lucas, at the time wife. Yeah. I actually don't know when they got married, but I think she's credited as Marcia Lucas.
I have a cousin who mentioned her to me, like she's played an important role in all this, but I didn't just heard it offhand about Marcia Lucas, that she was pretty important. But
yeah, she was incredibly important to making it match, I think, what George Lucas wanted it to be. He was not satisfied with the original edit, and she.
So it wasn't like he was just clueless and other people had to come in and save his work.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of a ridiculous characterization of the events to say. And that's, I think, the most popular video that you'll find on that kind of characterizes him as being kind of dumb and not knowing. That's the popular story to tell now, because people look at the prequels and they're like, oh, when he had 100% control, it turned out so badly. So therefore, let's retcon and say that he was bad back then too. I think that's unfair. I think that's unfair to him. Yeah. But I think it is true that he does need people to help him guide his vision and not, the dialogue issues. He needed somebody to come in and punch up his dialogue.
Well, I mean, that would seem to be the case with anyone, right? I mean,
he can't do it all himself.
Yeah.
But I think he's a very skilled editor. He knows what the editing should be, and he gives very detailed notes. If you watch the behind the scenes documentaries, he gives very detailed notes to everybody in the process about what they need to do to change, the editing, the storyboards, the characters, just everything. He's giving notes on. He knows what he wants to see. But he didn't do the best job punching up that dialogue and making it sound less than cheesy. But I just think he doesn't really care about dialogue so much.
Is he still making movies, by the way? Or is he totally retired?
He said he was going to, and that they were just going to be for himself, and that nobody would ever see them.
No. Well, I guess if he wants to do that.
So yeah, we don't. Yeah, who knows? He made the most recent film he made was Strange Magic.
Okay.
At ILM. It was a pretty. It did very poorly, so it's kind of weird. Anyway, we won't talk about that. Anyway, but so, George Lucas is fond of saying that Star Wars is intended to be like a silent film. So if you turn off the dialogue and just have the score and the images playing, I think it plays perfectly. It's hard to find a flaw in the films if you play it that way. So a lot of the criticisms come up because people start talking. That's where things fall apart. But now, having said that, I would not change any of the dialogue in the films. I've grown to love it, and it's very iconic now. Yeah, even though stuff about sand Yeah.
Right. It's almost like, yeah, you don't want to take that out now.
Yeah.
It's
And maybe he will.
too fun to make fun of. It's like
Maybe he would if he could, but yeah, he's gone now, so there probably won't be any special edition prequels.
if there is, I want more sand.
He did make some changes to the prequels actually over the years, but anyway,
Oh, he
that's another
did.
topic. He did very minor ones though.
Oh, okay.
Like they replaced Yoda in the Phantom Menace. It was a puppet originally. They
Oh.
changed it to digital in the later releases.
Oh, I didn't
Things
know it
like
was
that.
originally a puppet. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew it was in the original series, but okay.
And so that's going back to the silent film concept. The score saves anything that's wrong with the films, I think, because the score is perfection. And I would challenge anyone who criticizes any of the scores who thinks that they're anything less than perfection, because I think they're perfection. John
Did
Williams
he do all 9?
Yes, John Williams did all 9. They're all amazing, and
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's worth it for them to exist just for the score alone. But
I'll have to listen. Yeah, I remember like because when I saw episode 7, the score kind of went past me. I didn't really retain it. But then went back and listened to it. I don't remember the score from episode 9, but I mean I'm sure it was enhanced the experience. But I'll have to go back and listen to it.
Yeah, I really enjoy the score from 9. I listened to it. I've listened to it a lot in the last 6 months. It's helpful in the pandemic times.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, if you match up the film that George Lucas shot with the score, I think it's just a beautiful thing. And you can, you'll look on YouTube, and there are just countless montages of events happening across all 9 films that you can put together and make something that's always fun to watch if you put it to Star Wars music. So you can chop those films up, and there's lots to love in there, even if you don't like the whole. I do like the whole. I think it's all intensely rewatchable.
Yeah.
I've watched each one dozens of times, some of them in the hundreds.
Nice.
So yeah, I watch every single Star Wars film at least once a year. I try not to watch them much more than that because I like to keep them special. But when I was younger, I watched them nonstop. So I racked up a lot of watches. And then like when the films first come out, like episode 9, I've seen probably half dozen times now, or so. But yeah, they're so rewatchable because the characters are interesting. Anytime you pop one in, you're just sitting there on your couch spending some time with one of your favorite characters, and that makes it fun and something that you always will want to go back to.
Now, you have a note on the prequels of maybe we already talked about it, but the story George Lucas wanted to tell.
Oh yes.
With that.
Yeah, one criticism I hear a lot about Phantom Menace in particular is that George Lucas should have started with Anakin as a 14-year-old, because it was too much of a contrast between little boy Anakin, and for one thing, having Natalie Portman right next to him, and they end up loving each other, and it's kind of just awkward. But then also having him become Anakin Hayden Christensen, there was too much time there and discontinuity, and it's just kind of weird to have a 10-year-old doing the things that he's doing.
Yeah.
But George Lucas has responded to that specific criticism saying, but I didn't want to tell a story about a 14-year-old boy. I wanted to tell a story about a 10-year-old boy. That's what he wanted. He told a story he wanted to tell. And I think there's a lot of really cool things to gain from that, because you get, wide-eyed innocence, complete innocence in Anakin. He's such a good character. He's thoughtful and caring about other people. He's unselfish, unblemished, naive, perhaps. He's ambitious. He wants to go and do interesting things, go out into the galaxy. But that is the story that George Lucas wanted to tell, is about a 10-year-old boy, and then he's 20, and the challenges that he faces there, and then he's maybe a little older in the third film, and why did he go from being that wide-eyed, innocent little boy to the worst villain the galaxy had ever known?
Mm-hmm.
What caused that? That's the story he wanted to tell. And, you know, somebody else can tell a story about a 14-year-old boy, but that's not the story that it is. And you kind of have to take the films, the canon, the text as it is. I don't think it's really fair to criticize a story for the story.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
For not being something other than it is.
Exactly. The story is the foundation of what it is. Unless the person feels that they didn't tell the story they wanted to tell, like if they failed at that.
Yeah, right.
That's another thing, but he has, you know, made it very clear that he told exactly the story he wanted to tell, and I think you just have to accept it and judge it for what it is. And another story that has a different ending, you know, you can judge that by its merits. You can judge the plot. I think that's a little bit different.
Yes, yeah, I see what you mean. Like the story is the story, but then the nuts and bolts, like the plot and the elements in the story itself, are where you can decide. Did he
successfully
execute
exactly?
Yeah,
that's the question, and I think it was successfully executed because it's something that I'm still going back to 20 odd years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about one more thing, and this will probably be something we get into more detail on another episode, because we want to make this a thing. So the monomyth.
Yes.
So first of all, just introduce what that is for people who don't, who aren't familiar with the monomyth and Joseph Campbell and all that.
Yeah. So Joseph Campbell took some ideas. I was reading about it the other day just to make sure I'm not completely ignorant of it. But so Carl Jung is actually the first one who kind of pulled some of these ideas together. Probably not the first, but someone who's famous for putting together these ideas that all stories that are told, particularly myths, have the same elements. And Joseph Campbell put that together into his book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And A Hero with a Thousand Faces is the phases of a hero's journey. And if you've ever read The Lord of the Rings or seen The Lord of the Rings, that is basically the monomyth. You can go through each step of the hero's journey, leaving home.
You start off in the Shire, for instance.
You start off in the Shire, and you go off. At some point, you have to lose your mentor. Then later, you have to be proven. You become a man, and then you come back home, and everything is different now because you've been changed you're back where you started, but you're different.
Right. So you don't you return in a sense, but not entirely.
Yeah. So there's more to it, and there's different steps and different elements. But George Lucas actually read this book by Joseph Campbell in college, and then again as he was rewriting the script for Star Wars, the original film in 1977, mid-70s, while he was writing it, he rediscovered the book and was reading it again, and has said that he used that as a guide for him to build the pieces that ended up in that original trilogy, including in Star Wars. So it's one of those films that very clearly follows the monomyth. And
deliberately, right? I mean, George Lucas knew, of Campbell and of his work and all that.
And you can make the argument that that's why Obi-Wan dies in the first film, and instead of going on to be his mentor in the next film. That decision was actually made pretty late in production, is my understanding. That but it seemed like you needed that emotional weight of Luke had to be on his own. I think that Campbellian thought in George Lucas's head probably ultimately made him realize he had to do that. Luke had to be on his own when he's out there taking on the Death Star. He gets to hear the voice in his head, but he has to be doing that on his own, because if Obi-Wan's there, Obi-Wan can just save the galaxy. It has to be Luke. He's the hero. It's his journey. And so it's very clear influence. But if you go back to the Bible, if you go back to the Lord of the Rings, if you go back to any story, you can find similar pieces. Some of them do it better than others. Some of them have more elements than others. But we've always been telling that narrative. And that's why Star Wars probably strikes such a chord with people, is because that is the story that we need to be told. We're all living our own hero's journey, and there's something primal and innate about that story that we need to hear, and it needs to be retold, and it continually gets retold generation after generation. And that this Star Wars in a way has become our myth for this generation. It's one of those stories that we pass on to our kids and say, this is the pattern: choosing good, rejecting evil, going out on your own, proving yourself worthy of the rewards that will come at the end, and realizing that yes, the world is a scary place and there's dark things and bad things can happen, but our choices ultimately will lead us safely to the end if we make the correct choices.
Have you read Campbell, the Hero with a Thousand Faces?
I don't think I've read the text itself, but I've read a lot about it. Yeah,
it's I was just thinking that could be a book club nomination. No, what if we?
Yeah,
we could read it and then do another episode in response to it.
As long as it's not 1,000 pages.
Let me see how long. It
One page
actually
for
is
each
a
face.
fairly long book.
It sounds like it.
Well, when the first time I read it, I didn't make it through it. I kind of lost interest. So what happens sometimes is like I'll read a book and not make it through it, but then I'll come back to it usually when I'm driving like a long distance. So one time when I was driving to Utah and back, I listened to A Hero with a Thousand Faces and at double speed. Okay, it's 400 pages.
Oh, that's not too bad.
No, that's doable. But there's a lot in it. So like because it gets into like it goes through the stages, but then it brings in just tons and tons of examples from different cultures, and it's just kind of overload. And it was hard for the first time, but then I did appreciate it quite a bit the second time, and I actually wouldn't mind listening to it again. And actually, I have a cousin who. So I mentioned my cousin-in-law before, who's into dramaturgy, I think is the right term for that, and then another one who majored in literature, and she's really into Carl Jung. Like that's her big thing, and she got me reading some Carl Jung, and I was very impressed with his stuff. But so it'd be fun to read some of him too, if you want. But because I do think it's an interesting, like whether it's something that's like true or false as far as like the monomyth. I don't even know if it lends itself to that type of evaluation, but like as a model for approaching stories seems useful. And it kind of helps with the idea that these are the stories we just come back to again and again, just keep pulling stuff out of it. It's just inexhaustible the way we can do that. I was just thinking of Neil A. Maxwell talking about the inexhaustible gospel. We got the inexhaustible Star Wars. I'm sure he would approve. Well, cool. Shall we wrap it up there? And we'll decide where to go next. This is kind of an overview, although we did get into some depth there. That's basically what I was interested in. But cool. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to chat about it tonight.
It was great.
And I'm going to watch some Star Wars now. I think I have
got
to.
The bug.
I got to get The Last Jedi. I'm going to do The Last Jedi and also some Clone Wars. Those will be the first ones. Yeah, I was going to be like, I should watch all 9 movies before I talk to Jeff. That didn't quite happen, but not to say I wasn't motivated, but I do want to go through all those again eventually. By the way, when is Mandalorian coming out?
October.
Oh, great. Okay,
Season 2. Yeah.
Okay, so we can look forward to that as well. Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Right. I'll talk to you later.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.